This is the 8th meeting of the Elected Official Compensation Commission. We'll first start out by going around the room, introducing ourselves. I'm Michael Kassler, Chair of the Commission.
Kiana Williams, Commissioner.
Robert Tobias, City Attorney's Office.
Nia Walters, Columbus City Council.
Greg Beaverson, Department of Human Resources.
Fred Rancier, Commissioner.
Keisha Hunley-Jenkins, Commissioner.
Darlene Wiley, City Auditor's Office.
Jason Jenkins, Mayor's Office.
Nicole Brandon, Human Resources.
Sarah Eagles, Commissioner.
Okay. First, we have meeting minutes from the March 23rd meeting. Have you had a chance to review those?
Yes.
Are there any additions or corrections? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. In terms of the agenda this morning, Greg is going to give us some more data information, and Nia is going to explain recommendations, rubric. I'd like to insert in there, I have a proposal for the commission to consider. I bring it to you as I had promised as an opportunity for discussion around. And then a review of the draft report and discussion of next steps. So if that is okay, we'll begin with a presentation from Greg Beaverson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. I'll begin with a request that the Commission had last Wednesday's meeting. And if it's okay, I'll kind of work through this a little bit. What I'm looking at right now is this document that you have in front of you on the long paper. What we have here are two different versions of the calculation, or first the data for the Consumer Price Index. And this is the actual document that's used to calculate that. Up in the top area there, the yellow highlighted area on the first page that you see there, that is that was the recommendation, and then the subsequent ordinance from the 2015 Commission was that the information used from the Bureau of Labor Statistics be all items in the Midwest, size Class A, all urban consumers not seasonally adjusted. And so what you see there for the last 4 years, toward the bottom, where all the data is, excluding 2022, of course, because we're only 3 months into it, that is that information with the year-over-year CPI growth at the far right in those columns. And then you can see where the geometric mean is calculated below, pardon me, at 1.21%. And again, bear with me if you would, I'm leading up to something here. The second page is the same calculation, but instead of the Midwest, this is all items in size Class A, all urban consumers, meaning all U.S. cities. And the request was to do the same thing that we've been doing for the Midwest, but recalculate it for the same period for all U.S. cities. So that's what I've done here. And you can see over there to the right the difference between the two, 2.53% for all U.S. cities, 1.21% back to the Midwest, all Midwest cities.
And Greg, those numbers are the same numbers that you sent us in an email on Monday, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It's important for me to mention, however, that this is information that was pulled together, obviously, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics website. This has not been checked or verified. We would, of course, go through a process where that would be leading up to the calculation for the CPI for the 2023 elected official salaries. But I just wanted you to know that we would still do that. So what we see here may not be 100% precise, let's call it an estimate, but for your purposes and to fulfill the request, I was able to pull that information together. Where I was leading with all of this, Mr. Chairman, as you just asked, this third document that you have here, not a whole lot on it, just that one table. What I was leading up to is that the request was to calculate each elected official's salaries, so the commission could see the difference between those two, I guess, indicators, those two series on the CPI. So what you see there is in the first column is the current salary, 2022 salaries of the elected officials. So if it were calculated at the end of 2021, and by the way, that uses December's data of 2021, which is not typical, the 1.21% is what the salaries would be for 2022 using the CPI for the Midwest.
Just to be clear there, that is an average of the past 4 years,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct. And that is shown back on the chart here, the table, where those 4 years are surrounded by a dotted line box. And I just do that for myself every year to keep that straight and make sure that I'm calculating the correct years. Back to the other document, the second column there shows 2.53% as the CPI for all U.S. cities. And you can see the differences there in salaries.
This calculation, you're advancing, this is the calculation that will occur the end of this, a similar kind of calculation at the end of this year.
Yes, Commissioner, it would be a similar kind of calculation. The problem, though, is that because we're not there yet, yes, we had to use only 2021 data. I could have gone to February of 2022, but instead of doing that, we just kept it with 4 full years there.
So this 4.54,
Yes.
is that a 2021 number or 2022 number?
That is a 2021 number.
Okay. So that's an is.
That is an as-is.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So what that says, and what those percentages say in each one, or in that column, the year-over-year CPI growth, is that what we talked about before, that that basket of, market basket, there we go, pardon me, of consumer goods and services at the end of 2020 costs $241.15. At the end of 2021, it costs $252.10, an increase of about 4.5%.
So, Keon, what we recently learned was that the first commission used the Midwest, cities in the Midwest. The subsequent commission that you and I were on, or the calculations that are what went into the legislation wasn't Midwest, but all cities. And given the difference in size, I wondered whether that was error or intentional as we were trying to find means to adjust salaries upwards.
You're asking me to recollect.
You're younger than I am. That's a privileged request.
I honestly don't remember. Do we not have any notes from our deliberations that would have suggested why we did that?
They could be in the meeting minutes.
Oh, okay.
I can double check the meeting
Okay.
minutes to see if there was something in the meeting minutes that said it, but I know that Greg has kind of been reviewing Dr. Lafayette's reports, and it's kind of unclear, because he doesn't really say, like, use this one. He shows you both of them, but it's not like he was like, this is the one you should use. And I think part of that is he wants you to leave it up to you to which one you decide you want to use. So I'm not sure why. I think we were under the assumption that the same CPI was used both commissions previously. And then when I was looking at the report, and then he was talking, and I was like, this is two different ones. I was like, was that intentional? Because I thought maybe there was an error in the report, so I went back and looked at the ordinance, and the ordinance also says U.S. cities, and I was like, no, they must have really used
The ordinance also says what?
U.S. cities for the
Okay.
2018 commission. So I was like, well, they must have for sure used that if it's in the ordinance and in the report.
So the only thing that's coming to mind for me, but again, it could just be me making this up, is I thought that part of our conversation was that we were looking at cities beyond the Midwest, right? So some of the data that Greg had provided to us last time, right, weren't just Midwest cities. And so in my mind, that's why we said, let's look at all US, but I can't remember for sure.
I mean, certainly today, on reflection, Columbus is the outlier of Midwest cities. We're growing faster, and the two things I'm trying to balance
Right.
in my memory, I know we were trying to be competitive in compensation.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty significant difference, I would say. But also recognizing that Columbus isn't like the other cities that are shrinking. We were expanding.
And that's what I feel like we had talked about at that time, yeah.
It may not be in Mr. Lafayette's report, but my recollection was in his presentation that he preferred the Midwest number. And I'll let you speak for yourself, but
That's what I remember.
yeah, that's what Sarah and I recall. That is not necessarily what we need to use, but while it may not be in the report, he recommended that Midwest number.
Do you remember?
You're talking about for ours?
Yeah.
I felt like he came back more than once, yeah.
So
You remember, Greg?
asked for
Yeah,
some
that's what I
further
thought, yeah.
explanation along those lines.
I'm happy to call him and just get an idea, like, and just talk to him and see what was said and kind of report that information back. I can send that out via email.
What's the commission's wish? Should we have Naya discuss that with him, or would you like for him to come back?
Well, there are other outlier factors that are existing now, given that big bump in cost of living that we're living through. So I think, this is just me speaking, I think we're okay to continue to move along, but it gives us a reflection that should things balance out, the discussion we will have, I think, is whether or not we want to compare ourselves with all U.S. cities or Midwest U.S. cities. And knowing that if we're comparing ourselves with all U.S. cities, we're in the smaller category, so inflationary factors are probably higher in the larger metropolitan areas, all cities, than exist in the Midwest. But it's consistent with the growth that's taking place. It recognizes the growth that's taking place in the Midwest, in this region.
And for me, I'm agnostic to having Dr. Lafayette come back.
Commissioner, and I just want to clarify, when you say we are the smaller of the larger cities, top 10, we are the top 14.
Yeah, we're in the top 14, but the top 10 probably represent, 50, 60 million people. And, then it shrink. I mean, the funnel, you got the huge cities, and then it just kind of waters itself down. 14 is significant, I agree, but it's not 7 million or 8 million, or Los Angeles, 20 million. Those are sizably different.
Well, maybe the commission, if there are questions from the commissioners, and if not, is going to reach out to Dr. Lafayette, we could submit our questions to her. If people have a question about that, or I'm making this up, I don't even know if it's possible, and I'm not recommending it, but you could take the average of the two, or something like that, to get a sense of where.
Well,
it would
we've
be in
also
the middle.
discussed that, you know, just setting a number, subject to it falling within the guidelines of, you know, does it max out at the consumer price index of the index we select?
If you were to do that, would you have to take the average of the 4 years and the average of, for the all US all cities, and the average of the 4 years for the Midwest, and combine that, and then, I guess, how would you even get to that type of number? Or is that even a possibility? And I'm just asking, just for the record's sake.
If that is data that the commission would like to have, that would be the way, I guess it would be done. But if I could make a recommendation, I would recommend against that, because you would be including the same cities, some of the same cities in both calculations.
Me, for one, doesn't like the idea of that, just because it becomes more complex and complicated. But it's just simple math. We could do that if we want to.
Well, maybe the question for Dr. Lafayette is, how do you take into account these two concerns, that if it's on the larger side, we're on the smaller end population-wise, and then if it's, you know, Midwest, and we're a lot larger, presumably, I'm not looking at the per capita numbers right now, but then the other cities.
Yeah, I lean towards, I think we're an outlier in the Midwest, where we fit, I think, more comfortably in the larger. I mean, I'm thinking about all the dying cities: Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Detroit. You know, if that's our pool, I don't think it accurately reflects what's happening here. I think we're more in the larger group.
And what's projected to happen by the time 2026
Right.
is here.
Right.
I'm not sure where we're going here. What, do
Well,
we want to have, do we want to have Bill Lafayette to come back to our meeting, or?
You know, 1% difference in calculations doesn't really, I don't think it requires that. And you know, we have room to negotiate here. So at this point, unless you feel there's additional information he can lend as to his recommendation, you know, he's recommending Midwest, but we might have other considerations we want to, like the other consideration in the last commission was to try to bring up salaries. And so we may very well have leaned, you know, to a different index. If council can accept that index, or it could take it down, or it could take it up. But if there is something higher.
For me, I do think it's the total package, right? Are we going to do something for base pay? And then depending on that, you know, which one we choose. Like, I'd like to see what our recommendation is in totality before we get additional data.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like we,
Okay.
at this point, feel like data overload.
Is that acceptable, Keisha and Fred?
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, if Nia were going to reach out, we could send
Right.
questions via email. I wasn't really thinking that he would come back to a meeting, but I don't have any questions.
I think we're getting to the point where we just have to make decisions.
Right.
And we're all like, we have so many questions, but let's just make decisions.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
well stated.
Go ahead.
And, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point out one other thing, pardon me, and that I neglected to mention when we were going over these numbers. Pardon me. One difference I did notice with all U.S. cities is that it brings it out to the thousandth to 3 decimal points instead of 2. That is copied and pasted from the BLS website. The previous data for Midwest only brought it out to hundreds, to 2 decimal points. I don't know how much that matters.
Explain what that's significant.
It could be significant in the sense that the rounding of in percentage. It's a good question, and that I just wanted to point that out because it's obvious there, you know, the differences between the two. But I wanted to point that out just to reiterate that that is an estimation at this point. There would be a lot of different verifications that we would go through before calculating for 2022.
From my perspective, I don't know that it really amounts to that much difference materially, but I think it would be appropriate if this commission got real specific on what we use in hundredths or on thousands, just so it's clear, and we clearly recommend one or the other.
And I'm just pointing it out, I had forgotten to do it when we went over before, and I wanted to make sure of that.
Okay, is there anything more you have, Greg?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on then. Naya, you want to talk about this rubric?
Yes, so this is the document, this is the rubric. It's fairly straightforward and simple. It's really just to be used as a guide in the conversation to kind of help keep us on track and keep us thinking, kind of forward thinking. And so when I'm putting together a report, it will help me to kind of like have some bullet points of your thoughts. So when I'm pulling it together, I can kind of like bring all that together nicely. And so it goes through each elected official. You say if you want to do an increase or not, yes or no. If yes, how much of an increase are you thinking that you want to do? Are you going to set the COLA using the average of the previous 4 years of the Consumer Price Index? I think an additional question is which Consumer Price Index we're going to use. So that's not in here, but, you know, just keep that in mind when you're thinking about it. I know that we had also talked about just potentially you all setting a percentage versus using the CPI with the understanding that it would have to be an if-then clause. So if 2%, if that does not exceed the CPI, if it does exceed the CPI, then whatever the CPI is, because that's something you all talked about in, you know, in your discussions. And if you are setting percentage, what is that percentage? And what are some of the things that you considered in coming to that decision? So that might be duties, comparator cities, ethics, inflation, growth of Columbus, et cetera. And those were just some of the topics that I pulled from some of the highlights of things that we've talked about as a commission. So you're in no way kind of like, you know, shrunk to those 5 things. It's, you know, it's, the world is your oyster in terms of what your reasoning is. But I just wanted to give kind of an idea of kind of what I'm looking for there. And feel free to expound and add as much as you would like or dislike to do. And so that's kind of what this is. And so it goes through it for each elected office. So I just thought it would be helpful. Are there any questions for me?
Whoever can answer this question, because I'm still wondering, because I just don't have recollection of what was the index we selected before. But assuming, assumption 1, that we left with a Midwest index, could council on its own selected a different index?
No, they cannot. And last year, just for clarification, you utilized the All Cities Index. That was the one that was used in the 2018, not last year, but in the previous commission.
That was the one recommended in 2018.
No, that's the one that was used in 2018. So in the ordinance and in, when I say used, I mean, it was the one that you all put in the ordinance. It's the one that was put in the report. So that
I don't think we did much in terms of preparing an ordinance.
No, you all didn't, but what I'm saying is, in your report, when you gave your numbers, for the CPI, you all chose the all U.S. cities, and so that was the one that was used during that time.
Okay.
And so that won't go into.
That's the clarification I
Yes,
really needed.
and so that will, because 2022, you guys all gave an increase, and there was no COLA this year, so the COLA will start in 2023. So in 2023, that is when the all U.S. cities cost of living adjustment of the previous 4 years of the Consumer Price Index will start being used.
Okay.
What, the number for last year was what, 4, what was it, Greg?
4.54%.
I read something last night that some economist is speculating that the CPI will be 6% this year.
Before the end of the year.
Yeah, and that just leads me to conclude it's good that it's an average of the past 4
Right.
years rather than just the past year. I have, as I promised, some numbers for you to look at, and I passed this around in the interest of starting a conversation. Jason, my apologies for calling you Robert.
No,
I saw the sign there. Okay, so what you have here is in the first column of numbers, what I did was I adjusted the salary through 2025 by 3%. The COLA used in all of these numbers on this spreadsheet is a 3% COLA, which, given what we've discussed, may be more than what it would be. But anyhow, the numbers here you see are 3%. So I took, for instance, the mayor's current salary, and I added 3% on for all of the, for 2022, 23, 24, and 25. I also did that on 26, 27, 28, 29, which is what we're about in terms of making a recommendation. For the mayor in 2026, this spreadsheet proposes increasing his salary by 4%, and then adding the COLA onto that. The numbers under that are my math on that. I hope those are all right. I did that because I thought a good case was made for creating some separation between the mayor's salary and the attorney and city auditors. It amounts to, I think it's about 6+% difference. And the other, so all of those numbers just play out at 3%. For council president and council, I'm proposing that there should be a significant increase in their salaries, and that there should be some separation between council members and the council president. So for the council president, effective 2026, this spreadsheet shows a 15% increase plus the COLA of 3%. For council members, it represents a 10% increase over 2025, plus the COLA of 3%. All out years, 27, 28, and 29, are just the addition of a COLA, in this case, of 3%. So there's something for you to look at and discuss. Yes.
Clarity. So I know in the past commission, they did just an increase and no COLA that first year. So are you intentionally doing an increase and a COLA that first year?
Yes, good question. Yes, I am doing it intentionally.
Okay.
Part of my thinking was that if we gave the mayor in 2026 just a 4% increase, conceivably, the COLA could be larger than that. And therefore, it wouldn't create any additional separation. The city attorney and the city auditor would be getting something higher than 4% as a COLA, and the mayor effectively would only get a 4% raise. Does that make sense? Okay.
My reaction of this, given the fact that the COLA is going to be a flex number, we're just going to have to make some assumptions on that. This boils down to, do we think large increases for council and president really is the issue in 2026?
Yes, I think in addition to that, I think my reactions are similar to, Mike, what I shared before, trying to understand, kind of the basis for 10 and 15%, right? Like I'd like anything that we put forward to be based in the data. Same thing for the 4% for the mayor, right? Are we essentially saying 6% is the distance that we want to create? When I look at the data that we had previously, what makes sense to me is to align to Greg's slide around per capita and the median there, because then we can reference back to something. So if we were to say that we're going to take the mayor to the median of mayors based on per capita, right, that we're basing that in data. Same thing for city council members and the city council president. Based on that as well, it looks like, I agree with you, city attorney does appear to need an adjustment. It's the auditor who doesn't appear to need an adjustment. So in my mind, that's how we would base our decision. As we discussed before, I'd like to align it to a data point versus just choosing a number. But I do, to Fred's point, believe that those 5 individuals, or those 5 positions, do require an adjustment. The mayor, city attorney, council president, and council members.
And not the auditor, you're saying?
Based on the data, no. I mean, when we look at per capita, city auditor appears to be well above the median per capita.
I also just want to, just for purposes of our discussion, I think, and I'm not sure if you were here for that discussion, I think the other thing that was discussed as it relates to the auditor is that the auditor has more of a CFO duties than the other auditors who just maybe typically doing internal audits. And so, yeah, okay, so I just was like, just a reminder that that was also a consideration that they talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do remember that discussion. I just, again, want to be able to base it, I want us to be able to point to a particular thing, and I feel like the per capita data feels like something that we could hang our hat on versus, again.
I'm very comfortable with tying whatever decision we make to some point of data.
Right.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. Bringing him up to, this is the mayor? Here's the, oh, okay, the blue is the
That in front of me. Thank you.
This is the auditor, so the auditor's over from a per capita standpoint.
Darlene, tell us about the responsibilities of the Columbus City Auditor as it compares to other auditors that you're familiar with.
Yeah, I think, I talked to, let me see if I can find this paperwork I had from last time. We did call and meet with, or take data from financial statements, I don't have it with me, about CFO responsibilities in different cities, and those lined up more evenly with what the auditor actually does. A lot of the auditor information that we got in the survey was actually internal audit responsibilities, which they're just looking at internal controls and maybe auditing different funds to find deficiencies, or it's more of a like a basic audit kind of situation. So those were the internal auditors in that comparison data, which don't really line up. The auditor here is responsible for all of the payroll, which is 80% of our expenses. Debt issuance, which we have over $5 billion worth of debt. Preparing the revenue estimate, as you know, that's in the charter. Also, the financial management system for the entire city, that falls under her purview. And collecting all of the income tax revenue. So the income tax division reports to the auditor, which is very different than other cities. In other cities, they might have an assessor who does the tax collection, which is a whole separate position. So there's many more responsibilities within the city auditor's position than the comparison cities that we pulled. We did get some salary information for 5 other cities, I think Austin, Charlotte, Denver. There were a couple others that we pulled together, where the salary is more comparable to what the current auditor salary was, over $200,000. One was $216,000, one was $205,000. I can provide that data, I can send it to you.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because I do appreciate the anecdotal data, but, you know, being able to hang our kind of decision on something, right, I think would be more helpful. So if we had that, then that could potentially change my thinking, but right now this does.
No, but I will resend it.
Yeah, we could put it together the way that it's put together here.
She didn't.
Yes.
put it together that way, so
okay.
they'll have to confirm.
Yes.
Okay,
So Darlene, did you hear that, just to make sure? I think,
I was like, can you, and Commissioner Williams would like it kind of presented how the other data has been presented. And so I think the way you sent it to me was just kind of informationally. If you can kind of get with Greg so they can be shared kind of in a table format similar to that.
And I did think I added the salaries after I provided this table, so.
I was just going to ask about that,
Yeah.
about.
I have salaries for some of those folks.
Yeah.
So in other cities, this debt issue is, well, all of the responsibilities of the auditor are very important, but the issuance of debt and the management of all of that is very critical. We have a top-rated bond rating because of, in my opinion, the good work of our current auditor and our previous auditor for all those decades. Do other auditors have that debt responsibility?
Not in the comparison, not in the comparison cities that we saw, what the actual positions were. It's hard to tell what the responsibilities are for those comparison cities. You know, maybe Greg has more of an idea of what, you know, if they provide that information. But I'm guessing that a lot of them are not responsible for the debt issuance and maintaining the, you know, kind of the financial policies that the rating agencies look at when they're assessing the bond ratings.
And if an auditor doesn't have that responsibility in other cities, who does?
The finance director, it could be the treasurer. It's different from city to city. We found just in those 5 cities that we looked at, it was different for almost every single one of those 5 cities, who was responsible for that.
That's money. I mean, that's something huge. And one of the recommendations I thought about going out of this is, I think we were told before that, you know, a city attorney must be a licensed attorney. We need some higher level criteria, because if Wall Street, you know, doesn't trust for whatever reasons, and it's hard for me to say, I don't know, I've never interacted, and we slip a point one way or the other, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And we need to have, given the role and responsibility the auditor has historically played, because we really haven't had a lot of auditors, but one thing was consistency, because the long length of time working, and so we, you know, that I'm sure was one of the criteria that helps us in our bond rating. But then second to that is the policies that dictate how we spend our money. And I think we have to come out of here with that recommendation specifically. There needs to be a charter review on that. I mean, small, little incremental differences can be millions of dollars.
What do you
In the bond
suggesting
ratings.
on a charter review?
It could be CPA. I don't know if there's some finance degrees that do this. I mean, somebody can do a study of what, you know, who's interacting with Wall Street, but certainly this is too big of an issue to leave.
That's a really good point, and I think that it's hard to separate the person from the, you know, just what the position is, because, you know, Auditor Kilgore is very well respected on Wall Street. She was a municipal advisor for several years. So, just that interaction with her and the rating agencies, because she's so well respected, we do continue to maintain our AAA rating, even in some of the difficult financial times that we've been through.
I'm sure that went into the recommendation from Hugh Dorian that,
Yeah.
better play safe here.
While maybe requiring the auditor to be a CPA, there are plenty of CPAs that couldn't do the job adequately, like.
I'm not a bond person.
Right.
So
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah.
So, but this is big money.
So how do we align on what those things are then?
I think we took some guesses last time.
Well, I guess I'm saying specifically to Darlene's last point around, it's not just CPA, it's something around bonds, so on and so forth. So if we're going to make a recommendation, I just want us to be clear about like what that recommendation is.
Probably need a study. I mean, you guys are compensation people. Does it begin with a study of, what the position is and who they are accounting to? In this case, it's not just the city. They account to the Wall Street. And,
So what I'm hearing you say then, Fred, is that our recommendation would be that we like an assessment of what the appropriate qualifications for the city auditor are to ensure that they maintain a certain, education, certification.
right,
That sounds like what your
Right.
recommendation is.
yeah. You wouldn't send me to Wall Street.
Maybe.
So,
Any other comments? Sarah, you've been quiet this morning.
I'm taking it all in.
Well, I would propose that we take the next week to consider what we'd like our recommendations to be, collect some more information as we've identified here, and try to come up with some numbers at our next meeting. I know,
recommendation that we stick to something we can point to. I think that's, from a public review standpoint, I didn't think of that, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, what are you pointing to about the city attorney being lower? Because I think I'm probably on the wrong thing or something, because I see median salary 180 and our city attorney's at 200.
So if you look at the page that says city attorney per capita base salary, number 9, it shows that the city attorney is below the median.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
That was a good catch.
So, okay.
Also, just on the council president and the council recommendations, is the 15 and 10%, is that tied to what we're seeing in the per capita pieces where we see that they're low? Or I just remember that you all, and I don't know if Naya, if you're going back to review for other things in the notes from the previous commission, I just also wanted to ask, I know that you both shared in the PowerPoint and you and Fred have both shared that you were trying to get higher, you went as far as you felt was reasonable at the time, but there's still a gap. So I just wonder if there's anything that we can find about, you had a number but decided it should come down. And maybe not, it might not be with that specificity, but again, in terms of these percentages.
So I don't remember that, Keisha, and I don't think that the 10 to 15% tie to a particular item. That's correct, right, Michael? The 10 to 15% don't necessarily tie to, yeah.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
What I was really basing it on was my position that the council president's responsibilities are elaborate. The charter talks about them, where is it?
I think he's below median. he.
Yeah,
The position is below median based on per capita. So there would be a recommendation.
The charter specifies that the president shall preside at meetings of council, determine the agenda for such meetings, appoint the chair and members of council committees, and perform such other duties as may be imposed by the council. It talks about what happens if the president dies. From my experience, I know that council presidents are called upon to be around town at various events, sometimes with the mayor, sometimes in lieu of the mayor. They're called upon to serve on various groups that meet around the city. So it's on the basis of that I just think that the council president's job is a lot bigger job than of council members. It's going to be even a bigger job here when we have 9 council members, because at a minimum, the council president has to find 5 votes instead of 4 votes to get any legislation passed. There's just going to be a lot more interaction because there are 2 more council members, and much of that is going to fall on the council president's shoulders to come up with the proper votes or a consensus amongst council. There's 2 more people he's got to deal with.
And I would also argue, and I think the way it's structured, that he's ex officio in all council committees.
Yes?
So, this does encompass a citywide responsibility, whereas I think the intent of the charter amendment was to have district representation, but in this case, he or she the position still will be elected from the full city, but the specific responsibilities, even within the charter itself, are much broader than the individual council member.
So 2 questions. So one for Greg. Greg, would it be an appropriate ask to ask you to do the calculations at what it would look like to bring all of those positions to median based on your per capita slide?
What would it take to bring them to median?
Right, like what that increase would be, what percent increase?
problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, so that's one. And then Naya, I just want to check, because I thought in the last meeting, you wanted to get a general sense of where we were headed. So I know that Chair Castler asked us to come back, but did you want us to work through your rubric to some degree today?
I think that if you all feel ready and prepared to work through it and to at least have conversations to begin it, that is up to you all.
So you don't need anything pressing? I just got the sense in the last meeting that you did.
Well, the reason why I said that is that we currently have 1 meeting planned left on the 6th. And so if we're not having those conversations, using today to continue to have that conversation, then it's we're likely going to need an additional meeting to kind of continue addressing that. So that's kind of why I gave the rubric, so that you all could kind of start talking about it, and then you'll have all of this next week to kind of keep mulling through it, and then there's a conversation that could happen next week. But ultimately, it's up to you all to determine that.
Well, if there's consensus that what we want to do is reach median, across the board, all 5 areas, if we can reach that consensus, then it's a plug-in number. And the only thing we're really left to decide is what the COLA adjustment would look like, and if we want to use, 2 or 3 different indexes to compare. I don't know if there's a third index that kind of covers us, but we know Midwest cities and all America cities, large cities, or whatever, however that was stated, and if there's a third one that might apply to our community in general, that we look at those and kind of dice them up, and that seems to me to be the end of our deal.
I also wanted to add
I don't know that we would need a third meeting. Another meeting.
We agree on going with the median. Right.
If we have a consensus.
I think we
about
need to
that.
have a discussion about that.
If-
Yeah.
Or if there's another index that we can point to. but that, so that the math is, it's just math at that point. You know, I mean, can we go 1% above or below? I suppose we can, but that's not going to take another meeting to do that. I don't believe. I think the more difficult question is, you know, indexing which index we use for the COLA. Because that's going to control how much money they're going to be making in the out years. Excuse me.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to kind of point out, so when I was looking at the last report, and I know that Commissioner Williams, you talked about just being very intentional about hinging the discussion around the data. The last commission kind of went into some other, like, kind of, I don't want to say like fluff language, but they kind of like added context to outside of the data. And so when you're thinking about that, also think about if there are any, I mean, I know that data will probably be the central focus, but are there any other things that you're considering? And I know that Chairman Castor kind of talked about what he saw in the charter as it relates to council president, but kind of also be thinking about that as well. Because when I write the report, like, if I just say that based on this data, it's going to be a very short report. So I just want to make sure if there are other things that you are considering outside of the data, that you kind of share that information so that when I'm writing the report, it kind of shows that it was this as our central point, but these are the other kind of surrounding factors and things that we'll get. And if they exist. If they're not, then that's fine. But
Well, let me suggest that everybody is below the per capita index,
Well, currently not everybody.
except, well, the auditor would be the exception, but that was like,
Additional data to
but that
support.
was just nominal. It was like a penny.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big distance. So, you know, we're kind of in a situation where if we were to use this index, everybody's being pushed up.
Right, and Commissioners, I wanted to kind of expound upon what Naya was just discussing as well, because when we talk about compensation and compensation practice, compensation management, you always start with the data every time. You wouldn't do it without the data. But the discussion today that the Commission has had, the discussion in previous Commission meetings, you have discussed more than just the data. So for example, I have some, if you'll bear with me for a few sentences here, this appeared in the last Commission report for the 2018 Commission. And this happens to discuss council salaries. But it says that the Commission focused its discussion on what a suitable salary for a member of council would be if that council member were expected to work full-time in public service and not hold outside employment. You've had that discussion as well, I believe, this time. The salary recommendation also recognizes the breadth and depth of the responsibilities of members of city council. So you've got the data. For example, Commissioner Williams brought up the per capita data and this separation between the median, that market rate, and what our elected officials are currently being paid. But what is also, we talked about this a few meetings ago, what is the value that you're each assigning, or the commission itself is assigning to each of these positions? That is a very important consideration, and I wanted to bring that up from the last report. I'll just make a recommendation that each of the commissioners review the last report. I'm sure you have looked at it before, but the 2018 report and possibly even the 2015 report, because it has a lot of significant information in there regarding what we might call intangible information beyond the data.
Greg, those were the two earliest ones, and then if we did our jobs correctly, that's the two commissions back, they were setting up. You know, so I mean, I know what we were trying to do was definitely increase without going too far over what we saw in the data. Okay, I mean, we arrived at it, but and maybe not perfectly, because at that point, it was a larger, a larger breach, I guess, that we were trying to cover. This time around, it doesn't seem as big of a breach. And so, you know, I, for one, yeah, I still have very strong feelings about ethical considerations, the work that they do, what the expectation the public will have upon these council members. We spoke about the city, the president of city council, we've talked about the mayor. But given that our starting point is the per capita, and we are a growing city, so if future commissions looked at per capita growth, I think it will continue to spiral upward. You know, but once we see what those numbers look like in comparison to what 18 actually accomplished or didn't accomplish, as the case may be, we can make minor adjustments. But I think if we start with that baseline and move off of it, we're ultimately in a safer place. There may be arguments that could be made, for instance, that the auditor, you know, maybe this isn't applying fully to the responsibilities of the Auditor of Columbus. And we can decide that.
And I'll add to Fred's point, because I'm really aligned with this, is two very different commissions. I think our charge in the previous commission felt larger than what I think that we have determined in this commission our charge is, right? So there are a number of things that have been put on the table that I think have been determined are not the charge of this commission. So, you know, whether or not they should be full-time, part-time, whether or not it's a professional role. So we've discussed all of those things, but I think that we've been provided legal guidance on some of these things that we shouldn't talk about, or is not our purview to decide. I think we've been provided leadership from the chair that he doesn't believe that that's for us. So I hear what you're saying, Greg and Naya, but I do think two very different commissions, and some of the things that we were given purview to consider in the previous commission have been tamped down, I would say, in this commission. So I do think it's going to be a shorter report, because I do think that, to use Fred's word, the breach isn't as large, and I think some of the guidance that we've been provided this time is different from the guidance that we were provided the last time.
I did have one other thought. Thank you for that, Commissioner Williams. When you all are thinking about this per capita, also keep in mind the COLA, and so like that discussion, because I think the last commission, when they set the council increases, they set them at 20% because they recognized that they would get that 5% over those, you know, next 3 years. And so when you're thinking about that per capita and wanting to land on that seems to be the kind of points you all are kind of coalescing around. Make sure that you also have that reminder in your head, okay, if we do this, you know, where do we want to take us, where do we want to go? Or is if we do it this way, is that going to get us ahead? Right. I mean, the decision is ultimately yours to determine what you feel is the best. However, that's just something to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking of the numbers.
Well, if we could run those numbers with the assumptions that Greg provided today in the out years, that would be helpful as well. And you know, next commission, maybe it's not going to be per capita as the driving force. Maybe, you know, Columbus stops growing, and then they're going to be dealing from a different perspective. But the growth rate of Columbus over the period of time that we have reviewed, it took us out of Midwest cities. I mean, I think we generally might agree that it takes us out of Midwest cities and puts us in all cities, as one example. But things will happen in the next 8 years that may affect that may change some of the emphasis of a future commission. That's what you were saying, right? Yeah.
I'd like to talk about this issue of the median reference. I'm not sure I want to tie myself to the median.
Well,
We're a growing city. We're
a starting point.
Well, okay, if it's a starting point, fine. But I imagine Columbus elected officials should get more than the average of all these other cities for a whole variety of reasons.
No, not average, median.
Okay, excuse me, median. Right.
Because
that's just-
average is going to bring it down.
Right, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So median is a standard that our compensation folks use when we are determining, how we're going to pay people. So median is not something that I would look down upon. Greg, I'm not sure what your standard is. I assume because you put median in here is because it's a common measurement, yes. Exactly, exactly.
So, one thing to consider looking at the median and just in the mayor's position, some of those individuals on the lower end are ceremonial, which is why their salaries are a little lower, but then when you look at some of the cities per capita, for example, Pittsburgh is the 68th largest, and their median per capita is much larger than the city of Columbus. Some of those higher ones, like Cleveland, Cincinnati, 68th, 65th, and I think 54th, are much larger than where the per capita is. So I think to some degree we need to adjust for the position that that individual holds and the responsibility behind that.
The challenge is that there's color behind everything, right? And so at some point, we have to land on a particular definition. So, there's probably color behind why Lexington, Kentucky is a certain way. There's color behind, I just don't know how at some point in time, we can't just use what we have to make a decision. Which also brings me to my other question. Is this a majority rules or a consensus decision? And I can't remember how we landed the last time.
No, this is a majority rule, but we would like to have a consensus.
We'll do the best that we can.
Ignore history. So when you look at those higher numbers, I don't know what the history of their salary
Exactly.
has been. We don't want to, I don't want to go too far overboard. I hadn't thought about it. I give you all the credit. I feel most comfortable using an index, sort of like this one, and this one seems to give the greatest, gives us the ability to move salaries forward. If I use the other ones, I think we are either at or above, and so if we're looking to enhance, this one seems to be the one, and now you're telling us as well, both of you, that would be the common standard.
And I also understood that this was going to see where the numbers line up, and that then I wrote down several additional factors, right? That, like, what are the duties in the charter? What are the duties, the actual job duties compared to these comparison cities? There's a lot of things that we could look at this, what would the adjustment be just from the straight calculation, and then decide to layer on top of that, is what I heard earlier. I'm just repeating, is that?
So what you're asking for is what are the duties of each of these mayors?
No,
Okay.
I'm not saying get into, I'm just saying if, once we have the calculation of what it takes to bring everybody to the median, then we can say, oh, but these 5 cities don't have a strong
Right.
mayor.
Right.
So it should
Exactly.
be,
Right.
we already, I think, we haven't taken a vote on it, but people said there feels like there should be separation between the mayor and the other positions and also the council president. So now all we're asking for is if we did the straight calculation and bring everybody up, where are we? And then we can layer
Right. Exactly.
additional
Right.
based off of what we know for our context.
Exactly. Exactly.
There is one thing I've been thinking about that I meant to mention earlier. I think, Greg, in some previous situation, comments at a prior meeting, you said something to the effect that you start with the value of the job that sets the pay. You may have said that as well, right? And I understand how compensation professionals would say that, but from my perspective, the value of the job does not set the pay for elected officials at City Hall at all. Yes, most probably.
At any elected official, because all we have to do is go across the street to the State House.
Yeah, right. So my point is, in the realm we're talking about here, it's really not about the value of the job setting the pay.
Well, that,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
yes, and that's why I.
You don't agree?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because we have to have a standard, right? Because we're all trying to coalesce around something. I also feel like I just want to say, like, compensation issues are personal, right? Like, so, you know, I'm just going to call what I feel in the room, and I feel, you know, people feeling a particular way around the conversation that we're having, and it's because these issues are personal. But when you make decisions from a compensation standpoint, you have to get to a place where you can be objective. And that's why having a standard, and that's why I keep pointing back to the data that Greg has provided to us being that standard. Now, we will, to, you know, using Keisha's recap, you know, look at some other things, but ultimately, for me, we have to be able to say to people, these are the reasons why we did it. We looked at per capita. The median per capita was X, Y, and Z, and because of that, we wanted to do X, Y, and Z for our elected officials. Because I think when you talk to people about compensation and you couch it in logic for people, then they can coalesce around it. They can support what you're doing. But if you just say, well, and I'm not picking on the recommendation, but if you just say, we just decided to give 10% to these individuals and we can't say why we chose 10%, I think that's when people start to feel some kind of way, especially when we think about the bargaining folks who didn't get 10%, right? Because when you tell them they're 4%, you're going to tell them why you gave them 4%. And so for me, I just think we have to be really circumspect around why we made the decision, hook it on to something, and know that it is based in how most compensation decisions in government corporations are done versus gut feelings. And that's why I feel strongly that we have to hook it to data and then provide some additional context.
I support that 100%.
How did, you two were on the commission 4 years ago. How did you come up with the 20% for council members?
I think we looked at this kind of data and saw how little was being compensated to that office. See, the other difficulty here is, and I keep making this mistake, we're not talking about anybody who's in public office in the city of Columbus today. We don't know who they're going to be in 2025. So, you know, we got to erase our minds of that and really get focused. And that gets to where I agree 100%. We are talking to the public, not about we're here not about our feelings. It's about, you know, okay, you know, we are the check against the elected officials in the public's mind. So how did you do this? And I like the idea of anchoring on to something and then let us start thinking about what adjustments, if any, or are the adjustments adequately addressed by the COLA and what will happen to those salaries? I mean, if you're making $200,000 and you're getting 2% a year, that's pretty much in line with what's been happening generally, and we don't want to leap above the collective bargaining. So the city itself has kind of set some in policy, has through those negotiations has set some ceilings for us. You know, so I mean, I'm as I think through what our true responsibilities are and to whom they are, I think we need to use this data accordingly. And
Because Fred and I aren't the only people who were engaged in the previous commission who are around the table. Greg was our data person, right? And so the same information that he's providing us now is similar to what he provided to us before. And so this, again, was the data that we use. I do want to continue to underscore, it was a different time, right? And so there were other factors that we considered, but there are factors that have been taken off the table in this commission as well. So that's why I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison to, continue to wholly reflect back on the decisions that we made previously.
And what you've been talking about for the last 10 or 15 minutes, compensation is complex. It's not finite. If it only were, right, it would be a lot easier for the commission, and even my job would be easier. But it doesn't work that way. So the phrase that we often hear so many times, there's an art and there's a science. You're starting with the science part, and that's good. You need to start there. It's the art side that you're discussing right now, and there's a lot more to it. Again, back to that idea of the value of a job, if the commission feels that a certain job or a couple of jobs or all 5 of these jobs require some kind of boost in pay because you feel that it's significant enough to recommend to city council to do that because of the requirements of the job, because of per capita data that you have, because of responsibilities, because of all of these factors, those are all things that the commission should take into consideration. The data, yes, by all means, first. But those other things, those other intangible things are harder to consider, but they're very important to consider as well.
Well, and when I was talking about the value of the job, and this ties to a point that Fred made, is it's just really important for us to think about the job and not the people in it. Because I feel like a lot of what is happening is people are thinking about, their relationship with a particular person. And based on that, they want to advocate for that person. And what we have to think about is, what does the mayor pay? What does the city auditor pay? Not what should Andy, Mayor Ginther, get paid, not so on and so forth. So I think that, to me, is one of what I feel like is happening.
Well, I agree with your comment, and at least for one, I've tried to keep personalities out of it myself. It's having said that, it's hard not to.
Right, exactly.
But we're guilty of interjecting a face, and we gotta.
Exactly.
I noticed that we have not been saying anything like, the value of Mayor Ginther or the value of Council President Harden. It's the job that they each hold. Years ago, when I started in this industry, I was a United States Air Force officer, and we did something called manpower and personnel. We would probably call it industrial engineering on the outside in the non-military world. We had a phrase that we used all the time, and I continue to keep that phrase in the back of my head, which is, we're looking at the spaces, not the faces that are in those spaces. Yeah. So what is the job, and what are the requirements of the job? What are the responsibilities of the job? And so those are very important things, I think, for the commission to take into consideration as well.
Another thought that I have is, while compensation in the public sector isn't going to get you rich, and anybody that is interested in serving in the public sector, I think, recognizes that. Having said that, I think that we should do all that we can within reason to attract the best and the brightest for these offices. And I would hate to think that, and I'm not saying that the current levels are indicative of this, but I'd hate to think that people wouldn't consider, that are interested in public service, wouldn't consider it because of the salary level.
Well, you do if you are a lawyer.
Well,
You do if you are good Wall Street. You could sell those skills to the private sector, the nonprofit sector. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, there are some skill sets.
Yeah, sure, I understand that, but I'm just saying that for instance, council. Ideally, from my perspective, it would be good that council members were pretty focused on the responsibility of us
Yes.
being a city council member. And maybe they have another job, but it doesn't take up the majority of their time. That's how I look
With
at
their
it.
job as a council member.
And maybe the more you pay a council member, the less inclined they would be to need another job.
Yes, and, you know, and that's part of a historic issue, because we didn't view ethics that way, and we did view, I'm going to say, council members and many mayors in cities as part-time, because they could work in private industry. As years have gone on, as the size of cities have gone on, as issues have become more complex, you know, we're now we're reaching a phase, if we are not, certainly here in Columbus, where having outside employment does begin to affect your ability to fully perform your duties so, you know, if I have two jobs, which is the more important? Right? I mean, which is the one where I can miss a meeting and which is the one I can't? You know, and we kind of talked about this with respect to the president of city council. If there was a major incident occurred, you know, if he were a lawyer and a major incident occurred that required his immediate attention, you're going to say to the judge, okay, judge, we're going to continue the case at this point because I got to go to the city council. I don't think that's going to work. I just don't think that's going to work. And so, you know, yes, we're trying to your point, this is the art part. We're trying to formulate something that gets us closer. We may not be able to get home yet, but gets us closer to the point where everyone is recognizing what we as the representatives of the public believe are going to be their duties in out years and what expectations we will have of them.
And even their current duties. I mean, you're setting, you're recommending, but you're setting, in some cases, possibly a new market level. Who would have thought 2 to 3 years ago that people getting hired at Taco Bell would be getting $18 to $20 an hour?
Right.
And then if they stay there for 6 weeks, they get another $500 bonus. That never happened.
reimbursement in
Yeah,
Columbus State.
exactly. That never would have happened before the pandemic.
Right.
In that case, fast food restaurants have identified an immediate need, and so they have looked at that market rate, let's say it was $11 or $12 an hour, and said, we cannot hire people at that. Now those are their reasons, and those are those positions. But in this case, you're identifying responsibilities, future responsibilities, needs of the city. There is nothing that says you have to recommend right there at what the market rate is, below it, above it, or otherwise.
Right.
I just want to chime in for a minute or two. First of all, I mean, these are pretty amazing discussions, and I'm actually glad I volunteered to be the attorney for the commission because I'm learning a lot myself. But I also think that I'd be remiss if I don't just mention that you should be mindful of the time frame set in the charter, and that at some point, difficult decisions will have to be made, and to be coming to some either majority or consensus about the specific numbers that you're going to use and what other information is going to be contained in your report. So just friendly, gentle reminder.
Some formality to this, to the chair. I would move that we ask staff to provide us through the out years, using the all-city index to make that clear. What would the median per capita?
Percentage increase to median for each elected officials.
Yes.
What is that
What
percentage
is that
difference?
number?
Okay.
And we will have that in front of us quite clear. And then we are going to, again, I don't see a need for another meeting. I think we can get this wrapped up next week. Once we have that, we're shifting in small increments regardless of where we ultimately go. I mean, it's not the start from zero anymore. We're kind of,
Let me propose this, that we have staff do those calculations and get them to the commissioners
as soon as possible.
right away.
Yeah, as soon as possible.
So we can be thinking about all that.
Yeah.
As well as, I know, Keisha, when you and I talked recently, you had some points that you wanted to make sure that we get in.
Factors that I feel like we've covered that are for consideration.
So I know as I've read your draft, Naya, there are some changes I would like to make. So I propose that staff gets us numbers right away to consider, that we get to Naya comments that we would like to have put into the report, and then you get those to us as well in advance of our meeting, which we do have scheduled, don't we, for,
Yes, Wednesday, April 6th, from 5:30 to 7:30, and then making sure that we have an advisory that goes out so the public knows that, because from what I'm hearing, it is your intention to make your recommendations and vote on those recommendations next week.
That would be our intent.
That's what, that, well,
want to post
no,
that.
no,
Okay,
I know,
yes.
I know
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But we're not but I'm saying, the conversation that we had last week is that if there were any other public comments, we wanted to give an additional time for public to come in and comment. And so I think, just making sure that in our advisories, we say, we intend to kind of wrap up our discussions next week. So if there are any other public comments that you want to come in, please attend that meeting, or send us an email, because that was what you all discussed last week. So to that point, and I just have a couple of wrap-ups that I want to kind of get off so that we're all on the same page. So there's been an ongoing discussion about whether we're going to use the all U.S. cities or the Midwest cities CPI. So amongst yourselves, there needs to be a decision made about which CPI it is that you are going to want to use going forward. In addition to that, Greg will get the median numbers to you, and then that information will kind of go into like what you all decide and, what layers you're going to add. So,
Sorry, would
Yes.
that be Auditor Wild?
Yes,
Deputy is
we're
gonna
gonna,
send
we
that?
we need some more
yes,
information.
and I was going to add that, and then Deputy Auditor Wilds, excuse me, will also be sharing that information with Greg so that Greg can put it into the table format that Commissioner Williams asked for. So those are, I think, the top 3 wrap-ups. And then once I get that information, I want to just also note that the report that I sent y'all is very rough. I literally just retyped up a lot of what was in the past report, and obviously the conversations have been a little bit different with this commission, so things will be kind of changed, and how it's structured can also change. I know that Commissioner Williams mentioned that this report might be a little bit more concise. I also want to note that the 2015 Commission's report is online, and the 2018's recommendations are online. Their full report is not online, just the recommendations, which is really the important part, because the 2015, their report is like 100 and something pages, but it's very voluminous with a lot of information that is just extra. But I encourage you to kind of take a look at those in your free time, so that when we come back next week, if it is your intention, which is what I'm hearing, to make decisions next week in terms of that, we have kind of looked at everything, and so the discussion can kind of flow just based off of that. And so I would encourage you to kind of take this and make use of it. Obviously, I didn't give y'all like a ton of space to put your information, but this is sent to you also electronically, so feel free to just type into it versus write into it. I'm a paper person, so there's that. But
For one of the points that you made, just for clarification, if we don't decide next week, to Robert's point around timeline, how much time do we have left?
that next week is the
Okay.
time that's the time.
Yes.
Next week is
Then
the
we
time
will,
that's-
we will.
if we're not comfortable, if I'm not comfortable with the recommendation next week, I'm certainly willing to push it to another week. The 2018 commission issued their report in September. We're on the edge of
September?
April the 1st.
They issued it in September, but they did not start doing their report until the end of July. So, I mean, in any account, in response to your question, based on when we started, that is technically the end timeline.
Yeah.
That's just based off.
The time frame runs from when the members of the commission are appointed. So if they were not appointed until July, that 3-month period started to run in July.
I understand all that, but if I'm not comfortable that we have come up with our report with all of the points that we want to include in the report and come up with the proper numbers, I just can't be pushed to make sure that we do this in 90 days if it takes 100 days.
Should we set another date now in case that happens, just so we have it on the books?
I
if we
think it
need
comes down to a recommendation to the Charter Commission that 90 days might not be enough. I mean, it is what it is. It's a charter kind of provision, if I'm correct. So if I think we've been very diligent. We've met every week. We've done all we can to get within that parameter. If we don't meet that parameter, I think that goes into one of the recommendations that comes out of this, that 90 days isn't enough.
I'm committed to meeting the parameter. I don't know if I have too many more meetings that I'm going to be able to do, if I'm just honest. It's a lot of time away from work.
I think the reason maybe that the Charter Commission put 90 days in is to recognize that it's a volunteer commission and people are taking time away from their regular employment, and to also give a framework so people didn't make it take 8 or 9 months.
And I also just want to be very clear that I'm not pushing the commission to make a decision. I was simply answering the question based on what the question was and how many days we had left, based on the charter recommendation.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, there is an allowance in the charter provision, basically where council can compel the commission to finalize the report if you go beyond the 90 days. So there is some anticipation that, yes, in certain instances, you might go beyond, but the goal should be to stay within the time frame if possible.
Yes. Okay, so just to review, if we could I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was telling a joke. I said I don't want to get compelled.
So just to be clear here, if staff will get to Naya the information requested, and if staff can forward to the commissioners by close of business on Friday, that information, and if commissioners can get to Naya any verbiage that they want to see in the report related to the conversations that we've had. If you can get that to Naya by close of business on Friday, so you could bring that to us then to our Wednesday meeting, but you can provide to the commission all of those numbers that you've agreed to and explanations you've agreed to get to us. Is that okay?
I will try to have that draft report. I mean, if you guys get to me at close of business Friday, I will try to have that report to you on Tuesday, like I generally have your meeting minutes and stuff. I'll try to have it to you on Tuesday so you can at least have one evening to kind of read it through, even if you're not able to kind of really get deep into it, but at least have it for reading materials before Wednesday's meeting. And I also want to remind you that Wednesday's meeting is in the evening on Wednesday, so it's 5:30 to 7:30, and not our typical 10 a.m. To 12 p.m. meeting.
Here or in chambers?
We will still be in this room.
Okay, are there other,
Open to the pub, we have the capacity to do
They can
the meeting.
They can come in here.
Oh,
But
well, not just that, but it was televised.
this will be as well. This is televised too.
Okay. Oh, well, okay.
All of our meetings are televised.
Okay.
So
Oh.
we just televise in different areas.
I didn't have there was no green room. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember entering the green room to get ready for the meeting.
All of these are.
I'm in the green, yeah.
are there other things that come before the commission today?
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that you all, so is there going to be, and this is the question that I'm just posing to the commission, is there going to be a decision made amongst you today or like in the next couple of days about if we're going to do the meeting? Because I know that there are some people who are strongly in favor of using the median for the per capita median, and some who said they were less comfortable. So is that going to be a decision you guys make prior to next week's meeting, or is that next week's meeting on the agenda for next week's meeting?
I want to look at the numbers and consider
Okay.
that.
I think that's the only anchor that we have right now.
Yeah, and I know that that was something that was discussed.
Some other anchors, that's probably the clearest.
Okay.
And that percentage difference, it won't be until Friday. I can get that to the
Right.
commission
Yeah.
earlier than that, maybe even today.
Okay.
Yep.
And then secondarily, like I said, just be thinking about, the decision that you're going to make in terms of what CPI you would like to use. I know that Commissioner Rancier kind of expressed that with Columbus kind of continuing to grow, he views it as more all-American cities because we're an outlier in the Midwest in his reasoning, but also for the remainder of you to kind of be thinking about that so that we can have that discussion. So I think that is
You'll speak with Mr. Lafayette about his recommendation, just to confirm that?
if you would like me to, that, it wasn't confirmed to me whether we wanted me to ask him any questions or not yet.
Well, do we want to hear back from Mr. Lafayette?
I think,
I don't have any questions for him.
and I also think ultimately he's going to give it to you all to make the decision about which one you use. There are two that he will say that you can use, and it's ultimately up to you all to determine which is the one that you use versus kind of relying.
Recollection that his vote was the Midwest, so I don't have any additional questions for him.
Okay.
Was his presentation, it's on the website that you can go back and watch it as well?
His presentation,
right.
his presentation is on the YouTube, that, and then his paper presentation is also located on our website. So feel free to look at both of those. I will also try to take a look to determine if he suggested anyone in particular, if he just talked about them broadly.
He might have, we just can't find it yet.
Yes, we're still looking.
Specifically in his report.
The average is more volatile than the Midwest.
Okay.
So that's why he recommended.
Okay, is there anything else we need to discuss today?
I have one last question. So in the case that you all do want to add an additional meeting, is the following Wednesday at the same time an okay date?
Within the evening?
No, probably back to our during the day, I guess.
What's the wish of the commission?
Yeah, either.
You can't
We
do,
need to decide next week.
okay, so okay, so
Just
that's
request the
the,
rest until we do.
okay. So, we have, the time frame is 5:30, 7:30, but we have as much time as we need, so, if it takes us longer than 2 hours, because it seems like both Commissioner Ingalls and Commissioner Williams it's a necessity to get this finished up next week. We can spend extra time to get that done. I just need to know that in advance. So I will make sure I share that information with CTV. Okay.
Bring dinner.
Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor? Aye.